The Mackie DLZ Creator was already tagged by many reviewers as the Roadcaster Pro 2 killer. But that's wrong. It cannot be, as it seemingly doesn't even want to be. It takes its own ways, and this is a good thing in itself, as it doesn't want to copy it or make yet another version of the same thing. Although, being an audio mixing and recording console aimed at content creators, it inevitably shows certain resemblance. Yet this device represents how Mackie thinks it serves this purpose best, and along these lines it is a great device from a manufacturer that made its name making audio mixers, and thus it has some really neat tricks up its sleeve. It even has 2 killer features, which we will see shortly, but it also has some flaws and disadvantages, so let's check it out. The first sign that it does not want to copy anyone gets quite obvious by looking at the elephant in the room. Quite literally, this thing is larger than any other console of its class, and it costs a whopping $800. If it is also worth $800, you'll see by the end of this review. What immediately stands out is the giant 10.1-inch screen. It's basically having an iPad in front of you with an anti-glare coating and nicely tilted upwards so that you can easily read and operate it. There's a huge amount of screen real estate, which is really convenient, and it more or less justifies the relatively large overall size of the console, which of course also comes at a cost of desk real estate. It will take a lot of desk space. The screen is touchscreen, and while it is not the most responsive, it is perfectly tolerable. It is not exactly an iPad experience, say for the size of it, but for the purpose it works perfectly well. As for the inputs and outputs, it has 8 channels, which are the 4 combo inputs that can take both microphone and line level signals, followed by the digital inputs for the 2 USB returns or loopbacks, whatever you prefer to call it, and also Bluetooth. These digital input channels can also be set to receive input from either the 1/4-inch or 8-inch line inputs that are also available for you at the back, or from the SD card or a USB drive instead, that you can input for recording and importing samples, for which there is a dedicated channel and a set of sample pads. These and the main monitor output can be controlled by the 100mm feeders quite precisely. You also have an Ethernet port, which is at the moment not used for anything, but it's supposed to get functions like the possibility to make firmware updates over the internet. And finally, of course, beside the internal recording capabilities, you get USB-C connectivity to your computer as well. There are 3 things that stand out in the inputs-output section of the Mackie DLZ Creator. First, a little gimmick that you can actually use the USB-A port, which is primarily meant for a USB drive input, to charge your phone or even plug a mixer lamp in there. The second, arguably more important, is the enormous gain range of the mic preamps. The Onyx 80 preamplifiers offer no less than 80 dB of gain. What it means in practice is that you can throw any mic at it, the DLZ Creator will not break a sweat driving it without any additional signal booster. No issue with the SM7B or any other gain-hungry dynamic mic. To be fair, the 66.5 dB of gain that the Tascam Mixcast 4 has offered was already enough for any podcasting or streaming needs. The Zoom PodTrack series has topped that with 70 dB, similar to the Focusrite Vocaster, while the Roadcaster Pro 2 and the Duo have 76 dB, and the DLZ Creator is the winner of the specs with its 80 dB gain. But what matters even more, that this is clean gain. These preamps are pro-grade really, and so are to my ears the headphone preamps too. Really nice. By the way, you have 4 independent headphone preamps to match the possible maximum amount of microphones, which, amongst other aspects, qualifies it as a dedicated podcast recorder. Every guest present can get their own headphones. Furthermore, this is the third special thing about the inputs and outputs, you can also create individual custom submixes for each headphone, which is an amazing feature. Coming back to the screen, what the DLZ Creator wins with this large screen is that it can host the probably most intuitive user interface I've ever seen in an audio console. There is no menu. Everything is sold through the tabs that you have at your fingertips, laid out all the time in front of you, and if you tap on them, there is maybe another set of tabs, but that's all. On the bottom of the screen, you can tap on the different input channel icons to decide which channel you want to adjust, which really only matters under the channel tab quite logically, as the rest of the tabs are universal. Clear, easy to understand, intuitive, pretty darn close to perfect, I'd say. Apart from the home screen where you monitor the input levels and basic channel status, you can go into the detailed channel settings for each of the inputs, where you can also adjust the voice processing using the built-in DSP options, which are the equalizer, the noise gate, the compressor, and the de-esser. Then you can add basic voice effects, reverb and delay. You can also handle the files that are on the SD card or the USB drive that you have attached. You can take snapshots of the overall status of the entire console with all settings to recall them later, and this is what other consoles call scenes or shows. You can manage the sound pads, which are called samples here, and adjust the available settings. You can control nearly everything via the touchscreen, and if not, or alternatively, with the rotary dials on the right side, which are multi-purpose dials which change their function for the different tabs, and what they control is always shown right beside them on the screen. Ingenious, easy, quick to operate, and effective. I really like it. The only thing that I don't like is the really small area where you can change the sample pad banks. That is very hard to use. You actually need Nicola Paganini's fingers and an Olympic fencing athlete's precision touche to hit it first time right. But apart from that, the whole user interface is well thought through and works extremely well. One of the signature features of the Mackie DLZ Creator is that no matter how much of a pro user or an absolute beginner you are, you will be able to cope with this console and make quality recordings, which, considering the wide array of capabilities it has, is not an easy promise to keep, but impressively, the DLZ Creator does hold up to its promise, at least up until the point when you stop recording, but we'll get back to that later. I also don't necessarily understand why you would purchase an $800 audio device if you are an absolute beginner, but it's beside the point. People buy cameras for twice as much without understanding their capabilities, so let's just roll with it. The DLZ achieves this by two things essentially: the different control modes and the setup assistant. The setup assistant really holds you by the hand when setting up the device. It tells you what to plug in where to position the faders, the knobs, and it also sets up the right gain for your microphone, which is one of the killer features. Mackie was not the first to introduce it. The Behringer Flow 8 has easy gain, the Audi and Evo interfaces have smart gain from the Evo 4 to the Evo 16 and Evo SP8, and also the Focusrite Vocasters have auto gain. You won't find it in the Tascam Mixcast 4 or in the Zoom PodTrack PA though, and while the Rodecaster Pro 2 does set up the gain initially, to a certain level, depending on what microphone or microphone type you select as a channel input, it won't adjust it to your voice, whereas the devices with auto gain, including the Mackie DLZ Creator, do. Which is amazing. Once you have used it, you always want to use it. I mean, it's not hard to set the proper gain for a microphone, but the auto gain is bulletproof and extremely convenient. Even though for the SM7B it sometimes says that there's no input detected, which is funny, but the SM7B is a really low sensitivity microphone, and at the end of the day, the DLZ has always coped with it. The Audi and Evos are a little more advanced in this area, as they can set the gain for all channels at the same time, whereas here you have to do it channel by channel, but that does not really matter. It's there, it's fast, and it works really well. As for the control modes, you can tell the mixer right at the startup if you are a beginner in the world of audio recording or a seasoned pro user, and it will adjust what you see on the screen and what audio control options are available to you accordingly. There is an easy mode, an enhanced mode, and a pro mode. If you are a beginner, the easy mode tries not to overwhelm you with too many options, so it hides from you the more complex settings and offers you quite usable presets instead. The enhanced mode retains the presets and still does not go into the very granular settings, but it does give you more control about your audio, like switching on and off certain voice processing options separately. And finally, in the Pro mode, you have everything that the previous modes have, but then it also unlocks all advanced processing and routing options with granular settings. A good example is the channel tab. In the easy mode, you can just choose a preset, choose an icon and color coding for the channel, rename it, which is super cool by the way. None of the consoles currently aimed at content creators can do that, while they don't really have enough screen real estate to implement it in a meaningful way anyway. And you can choose to bypass processing, which effectively means bypassing the preset that you have selected. And that's it. No further tabs, no other settings. Or you can go into the microphone setup, but those are actually also presets, as the DLZ Creator recognizes what you plug into the combo jacks, so you don't actually have to select an input source, just presets. That's what the easy mode works with, presets. Things start to look quite different when you switch over to the enhanced mode, where you retain the basic settings, but now you have an option to choose between a dynamic and a condenser mic and have access to the amazing auto gain settings right away. You also get the option to switch on or off the reverb or delay effects that you can set up in the next tab, which was, by the way, not appearing at all in the easy mode. What also did not appear in the easy mode was the second screen for advanced controls. Here you see the different digital signal processing options the Mackie DLZ Creator has built in, and you can switch them on and off and also control them to a very basic degree, like adjusting bass, mid, treble in the EQ up and down, and a slider for the compressor. Notice that the rotary dials on the side also have changed their functions. While in the overview tab they are adjusting the headphone volumes, here they adjust all the sliders you can see on the screen, even though you can adjust them on the touchscreen as well, whichever you prefer. The other DSPs that you can switch on will have a preset value. The high-pass filter, for instance, will be set at 70 Hz, the noise gate threshold to 45 dB, and the de-esser to 6.4 kHz, which may as well work for most of the cases, but they can also be awkwardly wrong. But that's why you have the Pro mode, where you get all controls unlocked, like passing a level in a game where you get extra powers. Once you have switched to the Pro mode, the Channel tab's setup screen looks a little different. Here you can also pan the sound left and right, and not just switch on, but also adjust how much of the voice effects you want to apply to the particular channel. But now you don't just get an advanced control screen like before, but actually a separate screen for each voice processor, where you can switch them on and adjust them on a granular level. Again, either on the touchscreen itself or using the rotary dials. And there you can go crazy with the settings. You have the 3-band parametric EQ with the high-pass filter, and by tapping on an EQ band or selecting it with a dial, you can adjust the frequency, the gain, the Q value, all the parameters of the noise gate, where you can see on the 3 bars what is happening with the signal in real time. Same with the compressor, as well as the de-esser. A unique feature here in the Pro mode is that you have individual presets for each voice processor, which are called the DSP presets. So far you could only choose to save a preset for the entire signal chain, but here you can do that for the particular voice processors as well, which is super useful if you want to A/B compare that processing without changing the others. Also, you get more granular settings for the reverb and the delay. One more really important thing, when in the Pro mode, in the home screen you can tap on the different headphone icons on the side, and while it did not do anything in the last advanced control modes, here it brings up the option to create a custom submix for each headphone individually, which is awesome. You can adjust how much certain headphone should hear from each input, and with that you can also take out certain input channels from the headphone's custom mix by simply muting them. Also here you can change the color of the halo LED ring for the rotary knobs to color code the headphones to the mic channels. Last but not least, you get an amazing feature on the DLZ Creator, the AUTOMIX, which is the other killer feature beside the auto gain. The AUTOMIX feature is essentially there to help you in 2 situations. One is where several people start talking over each other during the recording. This can get rather chaotic, and unless you have a mixing engineer rocking the faders all the time, it will end up in a horrible cacophony of loud voices trying to trump each other. In the AUTOMIX you can assign priorities to the microphones, and the theory is that the mic with the highest priority will be heard more than those with lower priority, thus avoiding said situation. The AUTOMIX offers 3 priority levels for each mic channel: high, medium, and low. The other handy benefit of being able to set priorities to the mics is that with that you can decrease the mic bleed, meaning that while you are talking, your voice will be less likely picked up by the other microphones in the room, as they are ducked according to their priority level. That's the idea anyway. In real-world use, I have one problem with this feature, but let's see first how it works, and here's what the AUTOMIX does. I have the Shure SM7B on channel 1, which is a gain-hungry microphone. The Rode NT1A is on channel 2, and the NT1 5th Gen is on channel 3. I have deliberately chosen very sensitive large diaphragm condenser mics there, so that we can really tell the effect of the AUTOMIX. To test it, I will need to make myself look like an idiot with a forest of mics in front of me. But here you go. Now I have pulled all 3 of them in front of me so that when I talk, all of them will pick up my voice at the same time, provided that I unmute them. I have set the gain and volume for all 3 mics so that their levels are about the same as you can see on the screen. Now if I push the AUTOMIX button, it will bring up the AUTOMIX screen where I can switch it on as a feature and then activate it for mic channels 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't have 4, so 1, 2, 3. Note that if I set the priority on high for all mics, nothing happens. So for the AUTOMIX to do anything, you have to set a different priority to at least one of the mics. Now let's go back to the AUTOMIX and set channels 2 and 3 to medium. You can immediately hear the difference, and if I show you the meters, you can also see that channel 2 and 3 are hitting lower levels than channel 1, and you can hear the SM7B much more clearly. We can even go one step further and set channel 3 to low, and if I keep talking, you can see this nice waterfall of levels. Channel 1 remained high, channel 2 is lower, and channel 3 is the lowest. Let me switch off the AUTOMIX for a second, so that you can maybe compare how it sounds. This is without the AUTOMIX. This is with the AUTOMIX on, where you should hear the SM7B the most, and this is again with the AUTOMIX off. Imagine 3 guests talking over each other without AUTOMIX. And this is how it sounds like again when I switch on the AUTOMIX. And as you can see, when the AUTOMIX is doing its job, it's quite impressive. The only problem with it is that it does not seem to apply the true gain sharing AUTOMIX features that is found in high-end conference rooms or mostly North American broadcast stations. As if it would, then whatever mic is active should get most of the gain, and priorities would only kick in if more than one microphone is active at the same time. Whereas what happens here is a little different. What happens here is that if I set the mic to low priority, it will audibly tame the sound of it, even if I mute all other mics, and the one with low priority would be the only one active. Listen to it. Now I have muted the SM7B and the NT1A, and you are hearing now the NT1 5th Gen. And as soon as I set the NT1 5th Gen to low priority, the sound gets dampened, which should not be the case. Actually, I switch it back to high so that you can hear me. So it should not be the case, as again, in a gain sharing AUTOMIXer, if a single mic is active, as you can see here, both of the other mics are muted, then all the gain should be allocated to the one mic that is active. But whatever the reason is behind, you can quite clearly hear the difference if I set the mic to high, to medium, or to low. There's a little bit of difference between the high and the medium, not too much. In the high you can hear me clearly, and in the medium it's audible but it's not that dramatic, which becomes very useful if there are more than one mic on medium and they all try to talk at the same time. But then if I set it to low, it is an audible difference. The sound becomes muffled and dampened quite a bit. To circle through them again, this is the mic in high priority, this is it in medium priority, and this is it in low priority. And again in medium, and then back to high, and then back to medium, and then back to low. And this is the low versus the high priority. So the AUTOMIX feature is amazing along the fact that you have it, but it does not seem to be a true gain sharing AUTOMIXer. Therefore, I would be very careful whose mic I set on low priority, as they will not be heard very much throughout the entire recording. Maybe for a producer's mic it's useful, or if you are an evil podcast host and don't like one of the guests too much, but I would rather not use it at all. If you use it in high and medium, the difference in the audio is totally acceptable, even if it does affect the sound of the mics which are set on medium. Still, the effect it has on the overall recording quality is enormous. Quite impressive. However, down the road, it will need a more polished experience, more in the true gain sharing direction. If only a single mic is active, no matter if it happens to be in low priority, it should get the full gain allocated and not docked regardless, as right now it has an audible negative effect on the sound quality, which is otherwise stellar on this entire console. So far what you've heard is really good and even more promising. However, as with everything, here you also have a flip side of the coin, as the DLZ Creator can cause its fair share of frustration to its users as well. And here I do understand that we are talking about the first iteration of the software. We are on version 1.0.2 by the way, and there is a lot of potential not yet harvested in this console. Just have a look at the Ethernet port, which is built in, but it does not do anything for now. This lets me assume that Mackie is committed to release firmware updates to the DLZ, and they should, as the following points do need to improve to justify its price. First and foremost, there is no setting in the DLZ to auto-mute speakers when mic faders are up. It should really be a basic feature, especially if a console is aimed at beginners as well. If you don't know anything about audio, it's a rather scary experience that you hook up your speakers, microphones, headphones, all excited and following the setup assistant, push up all the faders to Unity, and get into the panic mode as soon as the audio feedback gets louder and louder and everyone tears off their headphones and no one knows what to do, as nobody really understood the sentence in the setup assistant saying, "Be careful when turning up the volume as microphone feedback can occur." People will end up trying to tear out the power plug more often than not, as I don't think that we can expect someone not experienced in audio to know what the microphone feedback is. This feature just needs to be there, especially because it makes the post-fader recording function totally pointless. By default, the recording is set to pre-fader, which means that regardless of where you have your faders positioned, every channel will be recorded at the same level, at unity level, which then allows you to adjust individual channel volumes in post-production as you like. Post-fader, on the other hand, does record everything according to the fader positions, and unfortunately it also takes the master fader into account. So if you have monitor speakers plugged in, you will have your master fader muted while recording into the microphones to avoid mic feedback, but then consequently also the entire post-fader recording will be muted too. That was somehow overlooked. I have an issue with the USB functionality in general. Unfortunately, the Rodecaster Pro 2 is out there and it sets the bar on how USB connections should work. I get it that there will be no second USB port on this device, but the one that's there should really not cause any headache to its users, which it does at the moment. One of them is why on the Rodecaster Pro 2 it is a plug-and-play experience both on the Windows and on the Mac. You can just plug it in on the USB 1 port and it appears right away on the computers as two separate virtual audio devices, the chat and the main. 3 actually if you also use the second USB-C port. On the DLZ, you first need to install drivers on Windows, and if you want the second loopback channel called USB 3.4 here, you need to manually set it up yourself in your computer. As the Rodecaster Pro 2 has shown, it can be a plug-and-play experience, so it should be a plug-and-play experience rather than messing around with drivers and computer settings. Furthermore, under the Settings tab, you have a recording/routing screen, where you can select where you want to record and how. By the way, while you do have a USB port and an SD card slot at the back to insert a medium to record to, you can only record to one of them at a time, which really should not be the case. Thankfully, even if the user manual states that you can record only to one of the 3 options, so either in the computer or to a USB or to an SD card, that is actually not true. You can record to the computer and to one of the external storage at the same time. Anyway, you can select here if you want to record in stereo or multitrack, and my real problem here is that you really need to be careful, as if you are planning to use the DLZ Creator as your audio interface to a Teams call or whatever VoIP conversation, you will have to set the computer recording to stereo. And this is because Mackie has chosen not to follow the quite standard way of sending audio out through USB, because the DLZ does send out 14 channels over USB for multitrack recording, but contrary to what other consoles do, which is that they set the main stereo output left and right side to the first 2 USB channels, the DLZ sends them out on the 13th and the 14th, so the last 2 USB channels. And this is quite unfortunate, as most communication or conferencing apps only see the first 2 USB channels, or even worse, only the first one. Zoom being an exception, by the way. There I think you can set whatever you like. In Teams, you definitely cannot. Since they cannot see the USB channel 13 and 14, you will end up with no audio input into your communication app if you have set multitrack for the computer. So you will be able to listen to the call, but they won't hear you at all. So the only way you can use it as an audio input and output in most conferencing apps or communication apps is to set the computer USB recording selection to stereo, and then it works fine. Meanwhile, you can record a conversation to the USB drive called disk in this menu, or to the SD card, also in multitrack if you wish to do so. If you choose to record in multitrack, the DLZ Creator will record polywave files and not individual audio files for each channel. I don't really like it. The original Rodecaster Pro and the Tascam Mixcast 4 have recorded polywave files, which you needed to convert into simple wave files per channel for editing, which is not a big deal. I made a YouTube short about it earlier. But still, first, I think we have long passed beyond the polywave files, and second, both Rode and Tascam actually provided the software, which then conveniently converted these rather big files into individual channel audio for you. Here you don't have this. I'm just wondering about the poor users who are no audio experts using the console in the easy mode. How will they actually figure out how to get the recordings out of the DLZ Creator into individual audio files? Because with the polywave files, that is not so straightforward anymore. It is somehow against the concept of trying to please also beginner users with this console that in order to listen back to the recordings, you actually first need to route the SD card output to channel 9 and 10 and then move up the fader, and then you can listen back to it. I mean, it's not a big deal for anyone who has ever worked with an audio mixer before, but for beginners, it's a lot of trial and error and consequently a frustrating user experience. The lack of an accompanying software also means that you need to actually eject the storage you have recorded to and insert it into your computer to get the recordings off the console, as the DLZ does not appear as a USB drive in the Finder on the Mac or in the Windows Explorer either. I don't think any of the consoles did this since 2018. Anyway, the main thing is that it does record internally, which is great. Let's move on. Then the 8-inch input port is not a TRRS port, which means that you cannot connect the phone to it. Well, you can, but the DLZ will only receive audio from the phone, and it will not send audio back into the phone, which in turn also means that the DLZ only offers the USB and the Bluetooth channels with mix minus, so you can only have 2 remote guests natively. This is the Zoom PodTrack P4 or P8 level, which do have a TRRS port but no Bluetooth input, while the DLZ Creator has Bluetooth but no TRRS. Luckily, you can create individual submixes for the headphone ports, so if needed, you can use the good old IRIC2 method to include further remote calling guests. See my video about it. It should work quite the same way on the DLZ as it works on the Rodecaster Pro 2. And if you know how to do it, you can also set up the USB 3.4 channel as a separate input and output. And then you can record a third remote guest because that also has a mix-minus setup. But as I said just a minute ago, this is by far not a plug-and-play experience. You need to set it up manually in your computer and make sure that your communication software accepts it. To me, it would have made more sense if this port would either be a TRRS port or a line output instead of an input that you could then use to route the DLZ's audio into a camera or a video switcher, which is what streamers would have appreciated in the first place. The rotary dials on the side do offer a convenient way to adjust the settings. However, even though they are step dials, they are not very precise. It is sometimes impossible to hit the desired value. I could never land at 0 dB on the headphone ports, for example. Changing the sample pad banks is probably the only complaint about the otherwise fantastic UI. It is tiny, hard to see and easy to miss. On the positive side, talking about the sample pads, it is great that you can edit the samples right on the device. Not only can you trim it in length, you can also make them fade in or fade out, and most importantly, you can also change their volumes, even during the recording if needed, and that is sweet. At the same time, there are also some core features missing from the DLZ that its main competitors have. Talkback, for instance, is not there at all, but also in terms of voice effects, you only get reverb and delay, whereas the others also offer some voice masking effects or displaying dB meters on the screen, but most importantly, the first mentioned auto-muting of the speakers. Last but not least, considering the size of this console, I would have appreciated mounting options like rack wings or a VESA mount on the bottom. But the good news is that aside from changing the 3.5mm line in port to a line output port and adding mounting options, the rest can presumably be solved via firmware updates. The bad news is that they are not yet solved. So would I recommend the Mackie DLZ Creator to buy in 2023? Let's put it this way. If you are paying $800 for it, at the moment you are paying for the future potential and not what it is today capable of. Which is not to say that it is not capable. On the contrary, it is a joy to use, the auto gain is great, and the AUTOMIX is actually useful, say for the low priority mode. But there are also quite a few features missing, and some that are there but could work better. Let's just see Mackie's pace at releasing firmware updates and whether they actually address user requests. With that, thanks for watching, and bye for now.